Hello, this is the case study video for research methods. If I can just remind you as you listen to this video to write the Cornell notes as best you can and also answer the questions that I'll ask as we go through the video. Once you've finished, write this up as neatly as you can into your mind map and have a little look through some of the additional textbooks. So let's have a little look at some case studies then. So what these are is they are an in-depth study of perhaps a single individual, which is probably what we're most familiar with when we say case study, but also perhaps a study of an institution, so perhaps a school. So you might have heard of Ofsted, so these are a group of individuals who will go into schools and they'll look at a range of information and they'll come to a judgment. This will be a case study on an institution. Or perhaps it's an event. Perhaps it's a happening, something that occurred, and you would try and find as much information about it as possible and bring it all together, and then come to a conclusion about what the event meant. So this type of research methods will give lots and lots and lots of rich information about a wide variety of human experience. The downside, though, is the sheer quantity of information and generally the quite unique nature of the case studies means it's quite hard to generalize these findings to other situations. But a case study can include aspects of interviews, observations, content analysis, which we'll come to next, experiments, maybe biological testing on like blood tests and stuff like that, and psychiatric assessments. All of this is put together as one whole under the idea of a case study. It could be, quite quickly, it could be a small snapshot of how it is at one time, or it could be longitudinal, where you'd follow up individuals over a period of time and you'd develop the case study as they age. So we could focus perhaps on the more unusual individuals. So in memory, talk about Clive Waring. So this is an individual with anterograde and retrograde amnesia. So he can't form new memories and he loses his old memories. This is an incredibly interesting case study and quite a sad personal story of someone we couldn't create. He just kind of came about, and he's been observed throughout the last good number of years while he's suffered from this terrible disorder, and there's been a combination of psychiatric assessments and interviews and observations that have been put together to try and figure out what really did happen to Clive, and what does it really mean for his mind, and what does it mean for other people's minds. Events, so obviously 9/11 would be an example of a world-defining event in which lots of information was generated from that and can be assessed to try and learn from it. Or perhaps you go away from the unusual and actually maybe we want to look at what is a typical individual like. So you might choose a group of people and say teenagers, and you might follow an individual teenager around and find out what their life is like in a similar way. Okay, so let's see some of the good things about a case study. Well, because we're going into so much depth about an individual, we might find some bits of information that would be totally overlooked if it was simply, a questionnaire or a one-off experiment. We can maybe use this information, these situations when we couldn't set it up as an experiment. So of course, Clive Waring could never have been an experiment. The same with traumatic events like 9/11. So we can use these individual case studies to try and answer questions we might have that we could never set up. And also, this is the one approach really that we might argue has a holistic methodology. So holistic is where we will look at a range of different factors in order to answer our question. This is in contrast to a reductionist approach where we'll just focus on one aspect, like maybe a biological or physiological response. So this is favored by a group of psychologists called humanists. So we talk about humanists and the approaches, of course. Okay, some negative things about the case study. Well, Clive Waring is incredibly interesting. He's a remarkable individual. But the problem is he is just an individual, and we don't know if the problems that he's experienced is primarily due to the illness that he had, which brought on his amnesia, or maybe there was something else that was maybe unusual about Clive. So perhaps we can't apply what we find with Clive to other people, and the same with other case studies. Quite often these case studies are done after the fact, and maybe sometimes some time after the event has happened in someone's life. So these interviews techniques will often use memory of past events, and memory is very flawed. Memory is subjective, so it might be that people's recollections aren't particularly reliable in the way that maybe an experiment would be maybe more reliable. If you're doing a case study, especially if you're doing a case study of an individual such as Clive Waring, and it's a longitudinal study, your relationship with that individual can be, quite intense. You can know that person very well. You could know their family. You could know the people who's treating them. Of course, that's got some advantages, but it can lead to a lack of objectivity. It could lead to you seeing things that aren't really there, but things that you would perhaps want to see. So as you get to know the case more, you do maybe get more detail, but you might lose some of that objectivity. So an example of a case study would be Little Hands. So this is a young boy which Freud used for much of his thinking around the development of psychosexual stages. And psychodynamics is criticized for the overuse of case studies such as Little Hands and others, because it's seen as a very unscientific way of going about research, is to have these case studies and then not just use them to develop hypotheses that will go on to be later tested, but to actually generalize this to a very large group of people. Okay, what I'd like you to do in preparation for the class, just a quick search, is I'd like you to look up at the case study of Phileas Gage. So he's a railway worker a long time ago. He's someone we can't look at directly in the course, but his case study might be particularly interesting. I'd like a couple of you to tell me what you found out about Phileas Gage as you come into the class. So just 2 or 3 sentences, perhaps watch a YouTube video or 2.